Prince Andrew, former US President Bill Clinton, Michael Jackson and magician David Copperfield. All of their names are mentioned in these previously sealed court documents related to accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. But let's make it clear, these documents are not a list of clients or co-conspirators. The vast majority of those whose names appear are not accused of wrongdoing, and many of the names have in any case already been mentioned previously in either legal proceedings or in news reports. That said, the documents do include the names of dozens of Epstein's associates and those of people who were on the flight logs of Epstein's private jet known as the Lolita Express. Well, this initial release includes 40 previously undisclosed documents with about 1,000 pages of depositions and statements. And perhaps the line that really stands out the most is one about former US President Bill Clinton, an alleged victim of Jeffrey Epstein, says in a deposition in 2016 that Epstein once told her, quote, "Clinton likes them young," referring to girls. Now, the release of these documents stems from a now settled defamation lawsuit brought in 2015 by one of Epstein's victims, Virginia Giuffre. That particular suit was settled back in 2017, but then the Miami Herald took legal action to access these files to investigate Epstein's network. Now, remember that Epstein himself was found dead in his jail cell here in New York while he was awaiting trial for sex trafficking in 2019. His former girlfriend and co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, was sentenced to 20 years in jail for sex trafficking back in 2022.
So, ladies and gentlemen, here's a list of names from the Epstein flight logs.
All right, these are the people that were on Epstein Island, confirmed by multiple sources. Bill Clinton, George Mitchell, Alex Baldwin, Ralph Fiennes, George Hamilton, Dustin Hoffman, Kevin Spacey, Liz Hurley, Laura Hunt, Janice Dixon, Naomi Campbell, Christy Turlington, Henry Kissinger, which may be one of the most evil men on the world.
He is, yeah.
Joan Rivers, Courtney Love, Mick Jagger, Courtney Guest, Phil Collins, Simon LeBon, Charlie Rose of PBS, Richard Branson, Candace Bushel, Tom Ford, Vera Wang, Nadia Byerlin, Ko Stark, and here's some more. Seth Green, James Gunn, Dan Schneider, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Stephen Colbert, Kevin Spacey, Kathy Griffin, Oprah Winfrey, Sean Carter, Beyonce Knowles, Anthony Kiedis, John Legend, Christy Teigen Tyler, Ben Affleck, Stephen Collins, Will Ferrell, Eminem, Jeffrey Jones, Victor Salva, Mark Rector, Charlie Sheen, Tyler Grasham, Madonna, Catherine Hudson, Gwen Stefani, Stefani Germota, James Franco, Will Smith. Oh, has Will Smith been in the news lately? Justin Rowland, John Cusack, Anderson Cooper, Demi Moore, Brian Affleck, Meryl Streep, Wanda Sykes, Chelsea Handler, Michelle Wolf, Pharrell Williams, Quentin Tarantino, Robert Downey Jr. They are petrified of that list and what those films getting out. They have all the videos of all those people in it.
Really?
Yep. It's gonna get ugly. They're panicking.
So are they going to release those videos, or what are they doing with them?
I'm told that, well, it's looking like they're holding it back, that one person has control of that, but I am told other people have them and are going to release them at the right time.
So that's the big question. The level of involvement. You know, a lot of very wealthy and famous people travel in small circles. So you have to look how often these people came to the island. Was it functions? Was it parties at the island, you know, or was it specifically involved in these sex parties and stuff? And also, you know, how much did the people going there know? Now, I know that I'm playing it safe, you know, and I mean, it looks bad, of course. It looks really bad. You have to wonder, though, is everybody, because it's a system, you get a picture with Epstein. Does that mean you're involved? You go to his house. Does that mean you're involved? I don't know. No, you know, a lot of people went to his house. They were not involved. Okay. Well, you go to his summer home, his vacation home. Are you involved? Well, you know, starts getting a little bit murkier. You traveled with him to his private island. on multiple occasions, are you involved? Well, honestly, a lot of people that met him even briefly say, that you could tell what he was into. It was, especially after his first arrests for rape, right, with the minor. Not rape, but, sex with minors or whatever you want to call it down in Florida. He was free for a long time after that because he was nothing bad happened. Like he did a couple months in jail, let's say, with probation even. So everybody knew. And so you got to see if these people were going to the island even after that, then there's no doubt. And like the gentleman in the video said, the idea here is that there's videos on all these people. That's one of the ways Epstein made his money, was through blackmail. He would get people in these situations, get something on them, like a videotape of them having sex with a minor or something like that, and then boom, they would use that to blackmail them. Now, if you think that he stopped doing this, or that all these ultra famous royals and actors and politicians were going to the island and he was not doing this, you're mistaken. There are tapes of at least the majority of those names somewhere. And like the guy said, they have not been released so far. Somebody has them. They're going to be dropped at the right time, or they're still being used to blackmail those individuals. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I going crazy or what? Or am I playing it too safe? Thank you guys for watching as always. Buy red, sell green.
I think once he was arrested, then the opportunity came up to sort of get rid of him.
He is one of the most infamous last names in recent history, Epstein. As more documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's alleged sex trafficking operation are unveiled, we sit down with his brother, Mark Epstein, to discuss what led to Jeffrey's death in 2019 and all the controversy surrounding it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So as you know, if you've been following us here on Sidebar, we have been closely following all of the latest document dumps in connection to the case of deceased financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Now, to be clear, this wasn't in regards to the criminal or civil case against Epstein per se. Rather, all of these documents being unsealed and released are in regards to a defamation lawsuit that was filed by Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre against Epstein's madam accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, the court records are being unsealed on a rolling basis, released with John and Jane Doe's identified by their real names. This civil suit, which was settled out of court, happened a few years before Epstein's death in a New York jail cell. And that is what we want to talk about right now, his death. So, Epstein was at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York when he was found dead in his jail cell on August 10th, 2019. He was awaiting trial on federal charges that he sex trafficked underage girls. Epstein allegedly used part of a bed sheet tied to the bunk bed to hang himself. It's been called, quote, a perfect storm of screw-ups. During the night before Epstein's body was discovered, security cameras weren't recording. Epstein had been left alone without a cellmate despite orders from prison psychologists, and the two guards who were supposed to be checking in on him, they were apparently asleep. Guards Hova Noel and Michael Thomas, they were stationed about 15 feet from Epstein's cell. They both admitted to falling asleep. They later falsified records that they had completed required checks during the night. Both of them were federally indicted, but they struck deals that allowed them to admit guilt, and the charges would be dropped if they cooperated with the federal probe into Epstein's death. Now, the results of that probe were released in a 120-page report from the Department of Justice, which blamed, quote, long-standing operational challenges and also cited, quote, numerous and serious failures. Well, since then, rumors have swirled and conspiracy theories have persisted, with many people believing that Epstein, in fact, did not commit suicide and was instead killed because of the information that he might divulge about high-profile people. Now, in fact, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, he's been on a mission to find out the truth about what happened inside of that jail cell. And Mark actually joins us right now to talk about more of this. Mark, thanks so much for coming on. And just to let all of our viewers and listeners know, you have opted to not be on camera. We're going to respect that decision, but we hear you nonetheless. Thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar.
Good morning. Thank you.
Now, for anybody who's not familiar with you or what you're trying to do, can you explain what your position is regarding the death of your brother, Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, when I first heard that my brother was dead, I actually heard it on CNN that the government did not notify me, as they've claimed. I thought, okay, he killed himself. At the time, I had no reason to doubt it, and I just figured that was his decision, and I respected it. I grieved the loss of a brother, but it was his decision. But then, after the autopsy was done, and all the other information started coming out, it became apparent that it was not a suicide. When you looked at the autopsy results, the photographs we have of the body, the details of the mark on his neck, compared to the way they said he was hanging, nothing matches up. If you looked at all of these facts and evidence, you would not come up with the conclusion that it was a suicide, other than the fact that Bill Barr made that ridiculous statement about it being a suicide, and the chief medical examiner, Barbara Sampson, overrode the actual pathology of the autopsy and declared it a suicide.
Let's just talk about that for a second. So I want to understand the timeline of this, and correct me if I'm wrong. Did you retain Dr. Michael Bodden to conduct the autopsy here?
I conducted Michael Bodden to witness the autopsy. The autopsy was performed by the city pathologist. I, as a family member, have the right to have my own pathologist be there and to conduct an autopsy once the body is claimed, if we deemed it was necessary.
And the reason I ask you that is because you just said a second ago you thought that your brother's death was a suicide, you were mourning his loss, but there seemed to be something to indicate to you, I want a second opinion, to someone to observe the autopsy, right? What was the reason you thought that?
Well, because in speaking with his attorneys, they had a suicide, and they were sort of surprised that he did it. So we figured, let's cover the bases and make sure we have somebody there as well. Because one of the things that's not been out there much is that a few days after death, there was a hearing scheduled to appeal the decision for bail. The first time when he was first arrested, his attorneys asked me if I would participate in his bail. And I said, yes. I said, put up my house in Florida. I knew my brother wasn't a flight risk, and he's my brother. I didn't care. And then bail was denied, which is why he was in jail. And then they were going to appeal the decision for bail. And Jeffrey was putting up a pretty big bail. And they asked me for the appeal if I would guarantee his bail. And I agreed, in essence doubling it. So there was a chance he might have gotten bail. And that hearing was scheduled, I think, for the 12th, in a couple of days. So then I'm thinking, if he was going to kill himself, wouldn't he wait to after the bail hearing? Yeah, because if he got bail, he'd be living in his house with an ankle monitor and armed guards and cameras, so he wouldn't disappear anywhere. Not that I thought he would try. And then if bail was denied again, then it would be a more compelling argument for him to kill himself if he wanted to. A few days before the bail hearing makes no sense at all.
So do you have a theory as to what happened here? Because, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, there's a lot of innuendo. Do you have a theory as to what happened here?
Yes, my theory is that this was a targeted assassination. I believe somebody was planted on that tier as an inmate, because the Justice Department regularly plants people in prisons, either for, to put snitches in to get information from prisoners, or to put undercover agents in to build a backstory. So the Justice Department can plant people in the prison. So I believe, and I had been told early in the game that cell doors were left unlocked that night on the tier. I don't know how many or whose, but I've been trying to find out what other prisoners were on the tier that night. There was only 11 or 12 prisoners on that tier. So it's not like we're looking through thousands of people. And I would like to know who they were, when did they get there? Because if somebody was on the tier for 6 months already, he obviously was not a plant. And then after the death, a lot of prisoners were transferred off of that ward. So I'd like to find out who was on that tier, when they got there, and where are they now? Do they actually exist?
So I guess the counter argument to that would be, is if someone really wanted to kill Jeffrey Epstein, right, they had to assume he was about to talk and give information about some high-profile people. Otherwise, what would be the incentive to kill him? Did you ever get an understanding from your brother that he was going to talk about anything, that he was going to be a government witness? I mean, because I'm trying to understand what the motivation would be for him to be murdered in prison.
Well, I believe you're right. Again, that's which I tend not to do. Yes, Jeffrey did have... I didn't speak to Jeffrey while he was in prison.
Okay.
The last time I spoke to Jeffrey was the night before he flew home when he got arrested. He called me from France, and we just had a normal conversation. And the next day he came home and he was arrested. And that's the last time I spoke to him. I did not see him in prison.
And he gave you no indication he was about to be arrested or anything like that?
No, he didn't know. Nobody knew he was going to be arrested because back in the a decade prior, roughly, when he got in trouble in Florida, when he made his deal, whatever that deal was, he had a non-prosecution agreement with the government. It was all behind him. All of these charges, the current charges, came from back then. There was no new current charges. So he thought he was free of that because of the non-prosecution agreement. And I believe that was going to be his main defense.
Mark, my question to you is, you were going to be putting up the bail for him, but you said you didn't speak to him in prison, in jail. How come?
Well, it's a limited amount of people who can get to him in prison to talk to him, and the calls he was able to make for him to talk to his attorneys. They're limited phone calls and limited contact, so let him use it for what he needed. Yeah, and his attorney is the one who asked me about the bail. It wasn't Jack.
I see. Okay, now again, no indication from your relationship with your brother that he would have ever killed himself. And because Efrain Stone Reyes, he became Epstein, your brother's new assigned roommate. He was transferred, my understanding, less than 24 hours prior to your brother's death. He was transferred to a different facility. He actually died in 2020, but he made the statement once that your brother didn't want to live anymore. So, I completely understand what you're saying, where if your brother was going to kill himself, why not wait till after the bail hearing? But also somebody who's in that position, locked away, it's hard to predict what they might be thinking or what they might be going through. I'm curious what your reaction was to that statement.
Well, it's curious that he was transferred out a day before the death. That's one, why was he transferred away? The prison psychologist that were talking to Jeff had no indication that he was going to kill himself. He was actually on a suicide watch after what they thought was an earlier suicide attempt, which was not a suicide attempt, and he was taken off of the suicide watch. So nobody else seemed to think he was going to do harm to himself, and everybody, his attorneys and people he was friendly with that were in contact with him, nobody thought that this was going to happen. This was a surprise. Like I said, I don't know what motivated the guy to say that. I would imagine that every prisoner in there, at some point or another, contemplates suicide. I would imagine the normal thought amongst prisoners.
Now, to be clear, Dr. Bodden, who we mentioned, he didn't believe that the injuries were consistent with the suicide. He said there were these two breaks on each side of the thyroid cartilage. One on the left side, he says, occurs much more commonly in homicidal strangulation. And he said, I've not seen in 50 years where that occurred in a suicidal hanging case. But you mentioned the New York chief medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson. She listed the cause of death as suicide. She said, though, she's been able to review additional evidence. We don't know what that evidence is. Do you think she's not telling the truth, or do you think she viewed something that you just haven't seen yet?
Well, she's never said what that supposed evidence is. Now, understand something, too. When the autopsy was done, both the city pathologist who did the autopsy with Dr. Bodden concurring said it looks more like a homicide than a suicide. So on the initial death certificate, it said pending, meaning pending further investigation under the cause of death section. Normally, Dr. Bodden said it takes weeks to change a pending determination to an actual cause. We've been trying to find out for over 4 years what position, or close to 4 years, what position his body was in when it was found. Because the autopsy showed he was dead for at least 2 hours when they found him. So he wasn't coming back, and they're not supposed to move a dead body until the medical examiner gets there, because there's a lot of evidence just on the dead body itself. But he was taken out and brought to the infirmary. When the EMTs came after the 911 call, Jeff was already in the infirmary. They didn't go to the cell. I only found this out just the latter part of last year. And then when the Justice Department report came out and described the way he was found, it doesn't match the actual body results. The mark on his neck, the ligature mark from whatever was used to strangle him, I'm going to use that word, is in the middle of his neck, and it sort of goes straight back, as if you put a rope around somebody's neck and pulled it. Like I say, like in Carlo and The Godfather, when they got him in the car. But if you're hanging, and supposedly he was hanging for over 2 hours from the top bunk they said, in a seated position with his legs out in front of him, and his buttocks was off the ground, which means most of his body weight was hanging by the ligature. Well, that ligature should have ridden up high underneath his chin and back up like behind his ears to the knot, the tie where it was tied to the top bunk. But the mark on his neck is not consistent with that description of how he was found. Also, if he was hanging that way for 2 hours or more, it could have been 6 hours, but we know it was at least 2. Then the back of his legs and his buttocks should have had blood pooling in them, because when you die and your blood is not circulating anymore, it sinks and your body points. So if you die laying on your back becomes blotchy from the blood pooling under the skin. It's called lividity. So the back of Jeffrey's legs should have lividity, should have blotchiness on the back. He does not. His legs are clear.
And so, to add to that, they found these 2 nooses in the cell. There was a noose that was submitted, this kind of piece of cloth. It was not ripped, wasn't cut, didn't have stains or fluids on it. So, assuming for a moment that he was killed in his jail cell, how do you think he was killed? What instrument was used?
Well, because of the breaks in his neck, okay, which again is inconsistent with the hanging, as Dr. Bodden said, it's more consistent with either strangulation or a karate chop to the neck. And speaking to military people, I have some government connections. The way they kill people is you give somebody a quick karate chop to the front of the neck. It collapses their windpipe, it disorients them, sort of incapacitates them. Then they usually twist the head quickly and break the neck, as we see in the movies all the time. But in this case, it looks like he might have gotten a karate chop to the neck to disorient him and disable him, and then something was put around his neck. Not a bed sheet, because the mark in his neck does not look like a bed sheet. It looks more like a cord of some kind.
That's a very sophisticated way to kill him. And if when we spoke before, you said that you wanted to know who else was on the cell block. You think a random inmate would have had the ability to do that, or do you think it's somebody else who had some sort of training?
Well, it seems like somebody had some training. Yeah, it seems like a professional hit.
I guess the question is, if what you mentioned, the Department of Justice, they released this 128-page report talking about these kind of failures, these problems, but they don't support the idea that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered. They still say it was a suicide, but they should have been able to prevent this from happening. If this really was a murder, is it people not looking at the right information, or there's a cover-up? Because it seems someone would look at this and say, the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, is going to cover this up. The risk of doing that is greater than what allowing Epstein to live. And so that's why I think people look at this as a conspiracy theory. So what would be your response to that? That this whole report is a lie?
Well, let me ask you a question. Who killed Kennedy?
Well, I mean,
it's a 60-year-old unsolved murder.
If you want to go through that, we can definitely have that conversation about, about who killed John F. Kennedy and what happened on 9/11. I mean, there's always going to be theories and conspiracy theories. But if we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein in 2019 after his arrest, because, you can make the argument. That if there really was an aim to make sure he didn't talk, why even arrest him in the first place?
Well, I think those two things might have been separate. I think he was arrested because there was a lot of heat building up on the old case. And there was a reporter in Florida who got on this case and started looking into this. And then the victims started complaining that they didn't have their say in his sentencing deal. So the whole issue of the deal he got back in 2006 or 7 was coming up again, and that's why he was arrested.
Okay, so again, taking that as a way, if there was an effort to make sure Jeffrey Epstein didn't talk and we're going to kill him, someone have said to him, hey, listen, Jeffrey, why don't you go to another country where there's no extradition, and then we'll start an investigation, say, oh, we can't get him, he fled to another country. I guess it has to be so coordinated, so systematic, that he was killed in his jail cell, and there's a risk associated with that it seems to me that arresting him in the first place, why would you have done it?
Well, again, I think those are two separate things. I think once he was arrested, then the opportunity came up to sort of get rid of him. So I think it's two separate issues. I don't think he was arrested with the intention of killing him at that point in time. I think he was arrested with the idea of prosecuting him further for the charges he sort of got off on.
Mark,
And then the opportunity came up. Look, trust me one thing.
Yeah.
It would be a lot easier for me if he committed suicide.
Yeah.
I could have, taken care of his death and moved on with my life. But since everybody who's looked at this, who has any kind of experience with investigations, says it wasn't a suicide. There's a podcast series called Crime Waves out of the University of New Haven, where they go into this a lot. And I don't see how you can listen to the facts that are presented and walk away thinking, oh, it was a suicide.
So Mark, you've been very vocal about this, and you've been going on different media outlets to talk about it. What has been the response you've received for more information? I mean, the tapes, the videotapes from that jail have not been released. We know the cameras were shut off when your brother died, but there's no tapes of him actually being removed from his jail cell. You want more information. You want more documentation. What is the response you received?
Well, from the government, I'm getting nothing. The 911 call, I've been trying to get that. They're telling me it doesn't exist anymore. Medical records, I haven't been able to get. I mean, why? If this was a clear suicide, why are all these records being hidden? Like you said, where's the tape? Now, we know the tape from the camera outside of the tier was working. That's the tape that Bill Barr said he personally saw, and he saw nobody went in or out of the tier. And that convinced him it was suicide. When he said that, I said to myself, that makes no sense. Because if he was killed by somebody already on the tier. So you have Bill Barr, the chief, Justice Department person in the United States, making an error that any third-rate investigator would not make.
Do you think Bill Barr wasn't telling the truth?
Absolutely.
And who's he protecting?
Well, that's the question. Who did Bill Barr work for? Who was he there to protect?
Well, I'm asking you the question. I mean, that's the part. Like, again, if this is a systematic conspiracy, who's leading it?
Well, who does Bill Barr work for? See, I'm not going to speculate with names, but I didn't want to pick a name and then try to find evidence to support that. I've been following evidence and where the evidence points. That's how you do an investigation. So I don't say that you killed him, and then I try to find ways to prove that you killed him.
Right.
That's not what you do. I find if it came out and it pointed at you, I would say you did. But it doesn't.
Let's be very clear. There are a lot of question marks regarding your brother's death. There's a reason. There's a lot of these theories about what happened. I mean, there's problems. There was problems that happened in terms of video cameras and the security guards. I mean, we could talk about it. I am curious though, because you're making this very vocal right now. This past week, your brother has been in the news a lot. Do you think that these new developments, the release of all these documents, is going to add attention to your case and help your case to try to get more information?
I hope it does. Now, I've been quiet about this for some odd years. But then when the Justice Department report came out with the inconsistencies, they said they notified me. The government didn't notify me. I heard about Jeff's death on CNN. They said this medical examiner called it a suicide. Oh no, the medical examiners that did the autopsy couldn't call it a suicide because it looked more like a homicide. But then it was overridden by Barbara Sampson, the chief medical examiner, who, from what I understand, she did not see the body. And she claiming there's some other evidence that convinced her it was a suicide. And I'm questioning, why can't we find out what that evidence is, other than Bill Barr's statement? And other than she thought that Jeffrey might have killed himself before, but it's been shown that you can watch the podcast. Jeffrey did not commit suicide before. He was roughed up by his roommate.
Are you taking any kind of legal action against the government to get more information?
No, I can't, because the only thing that you could possibly do, which I don't have standing to do, is to sue for wrongful death. First of all, there's a 2-year window in which to sue for wrongful death, which is passed, and I don't have standing to sue for that, even though I'm his only heir, because I was not dependent on Jeffrey. So I suffered no monetary loss, so I don't have what's called standing to sue for wrongful death. So I can't do that. I had attorneys lined up and looking into it, but it turns out I don't have standing to make that case.
I mentioned this past week, here on Long Crime, we've been covering all of the documents that have been released to try to make sense of it. When we see the documents that have been released, is there anything that from there that supports supports you understanding some of these players, understanding some of these people that kind of gave you new information about your brother and who, again, if you assume he was killed by someone, did anything from these documents give you any kind of insight?
No, I wasn't aware of what was going on with a lot of his life, but trust me, I've been called many, many times by media people asking me about my thoughts about the upcoming document dump, like last week. And I told them I have no idea what's on those lists. I wasn't expecting anything earth-shattering to be on those lists. I didn't see any big, new, surprising names. Like I said, I haven't been keeping abreast of that. I'm not concerned about Jeff's case, in a sense. I'm not looking to defend him for the charges. That's what I'm here for. I'm only looking to see about my brother's death.
That's
because,
right.
like I said, it would have been easier for me if it was a suicide, but it doesn't appear that way.
What was your relationship like with him?
Well, we were close. We were always in communication. It's known I hadn't seen him for 7 years prior to his dying. And we both have different cities, so we're not in the same place often. And but we were always communicating. And time flies by, and years go by. But like I said, he called me the night before he was arrested. Just a normal, how you doing? What's new? But he would tell me funny stories of things that's going on. I would keep him abreast of what's happening with the rest of the family, our cousins and such, and just normal relationship. It was funny. We used to have a lot of funny phone calls. He was a funny guy.
But like when he's arrested, this is like a shock to you. You're like, what happened here? Like, this is not the brother that I knew.
Well, I knew he was in trouble back in 2006. He actually spoke to me. He told me that he was getting into trouble. He wanted to talk to me, and we met, and he told me that he was getting into trouble, for being with these girls. And I said, well, this is what he did, and so he had to bear the brunt of his actions. But we stayed in touch. He made a deal in Florida. He spent some time in jail, and then we've been in touch throughout. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, Mark. You said that this is what he did.
Well, he was trying. He did. Well, I said this is what he did. He was in Florida. He got in trouble for what he did. He spent some time in jail, and he got out and he was living his life. And like I said, the more recent charges stem back from that period of time. I don't believe
I wanted to give you the opportunity because it sounded like you're just like, this is what Jeffrey did. He was around these kind of young women,
Well, in a sense, that is what he did. I mean, he liked women. He liked young women. I wasn't around. I didn't see him. After 2004, so the last time I saw him was probably 2012. Between 2004 and 2012, maybe I saw him once a year. So we didn't get together a lot. In 2004, my mother passed away. So that's why we used to all get together. And after she passed, Jeff and I didn't meet, at my mother's house in Florida. So,
right.
Yeah. So we didn't see each other.
So again, going back to this idea that you mentioned, like, who might have been, being protected here, who was worried about what your brother might say, was there incentive to kill him? In these documents, I'll let you know, like, there's just a lot of big names and people that, common theme is that your brother would talked about, like, celebrities that he knew or contacts that he had. Did he ever talk to you about, like, hey, I know Donald Trump, hey, I know Kevin Spacey, hey, I know Leonardo DiCaprio? Like, did he ever talk about these celebrities and, like, these stories with them or anything like that?
No, he would tell me things like I knew when he flew Clinton to Africa, which is what first put him on the map. He told me he went to Africa. He took Spacey, Chris Tucker. He would tell me, mention people's names that he was with, but he wouldn't tell me much about them themselves. Mm-hmm. But he would tell me he was with so and so. Like, he used to hold like scientific conferences on his island, so he used to have big scientists, mathematicians there. So like, he told me that Stephen Hawking was there. He told me that he had outfitted a submarine for Stephen Hawking, so Stephen Hawking can go down underwater. So I was saying, it came up recently, so is now Stephen Hawking going to get smeared? All these other scientists, are they going to get smeared because they were there for a scientific conference? It's like everybody's trying to tarnish everybody that ever spoke to my brother. It's not fair to them. Because Jeffrey had a whole other life that was separate from his issues with the women.
Right. Right, and when when the bail came up, like you said, his attorneys contacted you. You didn't take the position like, wow, look what he's accused of. I don't want to have anything to do with him. You were open to hearing his defense and helping him in a way because he's your brother.
Sure, of course, yes.
Mm-hmm. And why would I not? Right. And what about, just real quick, what about Ghislaine Maxwell? Like, did he talk about her? Like, did you know about her? She got convicted. Like, you and I haven't spoken about it. I'm just curious. Like, what did you think about her?
Well, I knew Ghislaine back in the 90s when they first met. We spent a lot of time together, all of us back in those days. Well, I knew she was with Jeff for a long time, and I didn't really think much about the case. She was charged. I saw the headlines like everybody else. And I thought, well, now it's, she has to deal with her charges. I wasn't involved with that. She's not my sister, so I wasn't like looking to go the extra yard, so to speak. But
right,
it was like I said, you can go stop a stranger on the street and ask him what he thinks, and it's the same response you're going to get from me.
And I respect that. Like, I guess the one question I have, and I'll end it here. Obviously, you want more information about what happened to your brother, and that's fair. You want full transparency. But as all this information comes out, are you not interested in learning more about your brother, what he was emailing, who he was talking to, what his life was like? Because, he's no longer here to talk about and try to find information. You're not interested in seeing more about the communications he had or the life that he lived?
No, I know enough about that to satisfy me. I don't need to see any more like dirt on him or anybody else. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in who potentially killed my brother.
Mark Epstein, thank you so much for taking the time, sir. Appreciate it, and we will continue to follow what happens in this investigation.
I hope they investigate the death as opposed to just the charges. That's the purpose of this. Yes,
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate it. All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. We're going to continue to follow the Epstein case for you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. See you next time.
Prince Andrew and the former President Bill Clinton have been named in newly released court documents relating to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. They include associates, friends and alleged victims of the disgraced billionaire who died in jail 5 years ago. The papers relate to a case that was brought against Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's currently serving a 20-year jail sentence for child sex trafficking. Our correspondent in Los Angeles, Peter Bowes, told us more about what's in the documents.
There are 943 pages in all, transcripts of interviews, depositions, all part of a civil lawsuit brought by one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers against Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime friend and associate, who is now serving 20 years in prison for crimes that she committed with him. And yes, these documents have references to several of the very high-profile people that we know were associates of Jeffrey Epstein over the years. There are more than 60 references to Prince Andrew. There's the repeating of at least one allegation against him that in the past Buckingham Palace has described as categorically untrue. Former President Bill Clinton is also mentioned as expected. He was known sometimes to use Jeffrey Epstein's planes to fly on humanitarian trips to Africa. But again, there is no suggestion in these documents that he did anything illegal. There are also some references to Donald Trump, and again, no suggestion that he was involved in any wrongdoing. And also references and the names of many other people who are not famous. In fact, it's notable that the judge who authorized the release of these documents said that many of those people had not objected to the release of these documents, which suggests that for those people, this could be, in a sense, a clearing of the air, that yes, they may well have crossed paths with Epstein at some point in some way in the past, but for them, there is certainly no suggestion that they are implicated in his crimes. There is still more to come on this. There are some more documents that are due to be released in the coming days.
Our correspondent in Los Angeles, Peter Bowes there. Well, let's go live now to Lucia Osborne-Crowley, who's a legal affairs reporter with legal news service Law 360 and the author of a forthcoming book on the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, The Lasting Harm. Thank you so much for joining us, Lucia. This is a long-awaited, long-anticipated list. Why have the names been released now?
Well, this, I think, is one of the most important things to talk about today because, as we've just heard, this lawsuit was filed in 2015. It's a lawsuit that's almost 10 years old, and these names have been protected by judges for again and again over those 9 years. And it's really significant that Judge Loretta Preska has made this decision to make these documents public, because I think it shows that there has been a shift both in the legal system and in the culture in terms of taking these kind of sexual offences more seriously. Of course, in the time between, so this is a defamation lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell brought by Virginia Giuffre, who, as we know, has been fighting for justice for herself and other survivors of Jeffrey Epstein for a very, very long time. And in the time since this lawsuit was filed, of course, as Peter just mentioned, Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted in a federal trial. So the fact that a decision has been made to stop protecting the names of these people just shows us that I think the legal landscape is changing, that judges are more willing to be transparent and more willing to stand up to wealth and power when it comes to the impunity that they have operated with for a very long time.
What's the legal implication for the names on the list?
So, as we've just heard, for a number of the names, there is no allegation of any illegal conduct, so any involvement in the sex trafficking or sexual abuse itself. There is a repetition of an allegation we have heard before, but this is in sworn testimony. So there's another victim who alleges that Prince Andrew groped her in one of Jeffrey Epstein's homes. The fact that that allegation has been repeated in a deposition is significant. I think he will have to answer questions about that. As we know, the palace and he himself have vehemently denied all allegations, but the repetition of this allegation by a second victim, apart from Virginia Giuffre, who sued him personally, is significant. And the legal implications also, the fact that these are now in the public domain might make it easier for victims to come forward and file their own lawsuits, because this is a whole trove of new evidence that was kept secret by the court system for a very long time, for not particularly good legal reason. And so now there's more to come. As we know, this is only the first 950 or so pages, and I know that there's many, many, many more names to come. And so this will give victims the legal permission to go forward and seek legal action if that's what they want to do.
Just briefly, Lucia, why have the names not all been released in one go? Because in a way, delaying the release of them means more speculation, which we have seen on social media, which obviously we won't repeat here, but why not do it all in one go?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the answer is that it mainly comes down to the fact that it's a very hard task for the judicial system to unseal all of these documents. Because these documents are still partially redacted to protect the identities of some of the victims who are named, who don't wish to have their identities revealed. So it's a long process of going through all of the documents, redacting certain names, and then uploading them to the court docket. It could just be that this is all that they could upload in one day. We might have exactly the same number of pages tomorrow. So unfortunately, it's a very boring answer, I think, about the clerical nature of the justice system. And we often see this with huge tranches of documents that
all makes sense. Lucia, thank you. Boring but very effective and helpful answer. Thank you so much, Lucia, for giving us a thorough overview of that. That's the legal affairs reporter, Lucia Osborne-Crowley there.
Bill Gates gave a really weird interview today where he was asked about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. I'll let him dig down from here.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful.
What?
President Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Vice President Al Gore, the pop star Michael Jackson, and the British astrophysicist Stephen Hawking. Just some of the famous names among a list of 150 revealed overnight in newly unsealed court papers linked to the deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. None of them have been accused of any wrongdoing in the documents, but their names appeared in a vast 943-page trove of evidence released from a past civil case involving the alleged Epstein victim, Virginia Giuffre. Giuffre was just 17 when she claimed she was trafficked to Epstein's Florida mansion in Palm Beach by his then girlfriend, the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now serving a 20-year prison sentence for her role in the affair. Giuffre alleges she was sexually assaulted there and at Epstein's other properties in New York and on an island in the Caribbean, along with dozens of other girls. Despite the fact Giuffre settled her defamation case with Maxwell in 2009, it's taken years to get the court documents and details released. This latest batch is another crucial part of that effort, but her lawyer says there are still thousands of other pages to be unsealed.
It shows you the people that were in his circle and why that's relevant, because all of those people were helping enable the trafficking operation.
But some of the big names that are being talked about today, that's not to imply that these people were the enablers. Isn't it more about the fact that Epstein was enabled to just carry on living the lifestyle that he did?
Epstein would never have been able to do this without the support of the individuals around him.
And is that because you think if you were just anywhere in his orbit, it should have been obvious to you that something was wrong?
Absolutely. I think that people sat silent for years and years and years. And that's only a fraction of the record that's within the court files.
Some of the documents released contain details of a previously reported encounter between another alleged victim of Epstein, Johanna Schoberg, who describes a moment involving Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre and a puppet of the prince, believed to be from the show's Spitting Image. She said they decided to take a picture with it, in which Virginia and Andrew sat on a couch. They put the puppet on Virginia's lap, and I sat on Andrew's lap, and they put the puppet's hand on Virginia's breast, and Andrew put his hand on my breast, and they took a photo. Buckingham Palace has previously called the allegation categorically untrue, and Prince Andrew has always maintained he never even met Virginia Giuffre. And in 2022, the prince settled a lawsuit that she brought against him with no admission of any wrongdoing. Likewise, President Clinton, whose name was mentioned 70 times in the unsealed papers, has said he knows nothing about Epstein's crimes, as has Donald Trump. And remember, there are no specific allegations about anyone else named in the latest documents. The biggest revelation, perhaps, that some of the world's biggest stars and politicians fraternized with Jeffrey Epstein, and that it's taken more than a decade for their names to formally be released, with thousands of other documents still to come.
Siobhan Kennedy, earlier I spoke to the lawyer Spencer Couvin in Florida, who's represented several of Epstein's victims, and to Anna Whitelock, who's Professor of History of Modern Monarchy at London City University. I started off by asking Mr. Couvin what this latest news means for the victims.
My clients have been fighting for over 16 years now for the full story to be disclosed, so it's a significant step in the right direction. This is not the end, though. There's a lot more information that really needs to come out and needs to be disclosed. But again, allowing the public to see the people that were in Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's orbit is very important so that people can judge for themselves whether they did something wrong or didn't.
From what I've seen and what I've been reading, there were no big new allegations or revelations. Were you disappointed by that?
No, in fact, the judge said as much in her order before releasing the materials, that one of the reasons why she favored releasing these materials was the fact that these people were already in the public domain. People had already talked about the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton, and Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew and others. This is not a list of individuals per se. People have been talking about a release of a list. This is normal court filing that merely mention people's names. So it is not.
So therefore, why has it been so difficult, do you think, for this information to be released?
Well, I think it's been difficult because a lot of the people that are identified in these documents did not want to be identified with Jeffrey Epstein in the same breath. You know, for example, this release of information gives us a little bit of color behind the relationships between Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew and how close they were. or Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton and how close those relationships were.
It's important to say in this that all of those people that have been mentioned say that they deny any wrongdoing at all. Prince Andrew has said that before, and also that's been a statement from Buckingham Palace. Anna, I just wanted to bring you in here. Prince Andrew is named in these new documents. He's accused of groping a woman, which he denies. But what does this do for his reputation?
I think in many ways it doesn't do further damage, in that so much damage has already been done. I think people have made up their minds about Prince Andrew, and although he was with the royal family at Sandringham, he's very much there as a member of the family and not a working royal. It just, again, really brings to the fore this very tawdry business that just won't go away for the royal family. And of course, it was an issue that a devoted mother had to deal with, the late Queen. Now, of course, Charles is having to deal with it as Andrew's elder brother.
What do you think he'll be saying behind closed doors, and what do you think the family really think about what's going on?
In a sense, he's a problem that won't go away for Charles, but he absolutely, I think, will have no qualms about keeping him at a distance, and the fact that the palace are not speaking for him is what you would expect because he's not a working royal, but I think also speaks volumes about the fact that he is now at a distance and they are trying to keep that distance from him.
He's not a working royal, but many in the public will see him as still having titles, still having many of the trappings of being within the royal family. He's still a Duke of York. So do you think there'll be more calls to remove more of this kind of furniture from him?
Yes, I think probably there will be further calls. I mean, his presence is just incredibly toxic and undermining for anything that King Charles might try to do to modernise the monarchy, to try and engage it with a wider demographic. And so, yes, perhaps there will be further calls for Andrew to be stripped of all remaining titles. Andrew will, of course, feel that, the fact that he is no longer able to represent the monarchy and be a working royal is punishment enough.
And Spencer, I just wanted to get a word from you. What are days like this like for people that you represent, just having to see all of this information come up again? I just wonder what it's like for them.
Well, thank you, and for even asking, because I think that gets forgotten in the greater story of the perpetrators here, the victims. There are literally tens, if not hundreds, of victims that are out there that were abused by Jeffrey Epstein. And to see these stories repeatedly in the news obviously brings up awful thoughts. These young women are now in their 20s, some in their early 30s, and have moved on with their lives. And unfortunately, this is an awful part of their past. But having said that, it is comforting to know that the people in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit are now being held to account for their behavior, finally.
Spencer Couven, Anna Whitelock, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.